In this video, we'll be talking about why Apple will be updating all of the Macs and iPads every year in future, and why we're not quite there yet. I'm ICaveAnswers and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you, and if you want the latest Apple leaks, news and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. And yes, there's a lot of comments going on at the moment where people are saying, oh, they're not going to update the Mac Mini because the Mac Mini gets a 2-year update cycle, and that's what they've always done in the past, so why would they change it now? Well, the reason they're changing it now is part of the reason that they went to Apple Silicon. The reason that they moved to Apple Silicon, as well as the heating issues, as well as the performance issues, as well as basically falling out with Intel, which I think kind of happened after they moved. The reason they're doing it is because they want to be reliably knowing when their chips are going to be here. There's never been an issue in the past of the iPhones being delayed because they couldn't get the chips. There have definitely been other product lines that have been pushed back. There have been delays with things like the new MacBook Pros, things like the new iMac got delayed. I think that Apple 100% wanted to release both of their iMacs at the same time as Apple Silicon in general. I think they wanted to make a splash and bring as many of those M1 products as they could at the beginning, but the designs weren't ready, the manufacturing was struggling. But the thing that they've never had delays with Apple Silicon is the chips. As I've said in the past, I'm pretty confident that the Apple Silicon M1 Pro and M1 Max chips were actually manufactured way back in March, April time this year just gone. And the delay has been all about bringing those new style of displays, the mini LED displays, to the Mac. We heard on the run-up to March and April time that there were delays with mini LED technology, and that's why we only ended up getting a 12.9-inch mini LED iPad Pro and not the 11-inch. It makes no sense other than they didn't have enough of those panels. They didn't have the manufacturing capacity to make enough of those panels. Now that we've got these MacBook Pros with it, it looks very much like they've resolved that issue. I now expect that the MacBook Pros will get an annual update cycle. It might even be less than a year for the next one, because I don't think this is when they wanted to release it in the first place. I genuinely think that we might see M2 coming by the middle of the year. I think Apple wanted to have the M2 MacBook Airs coming out now and the M1X stuff coming in April, just gone. And I think we might see the shifts becoming like 11 months until they can get everything back into the sequence to the time of year that they wanted things, because not everything can just come out at whatever time of year it wants. iMacs traditionally have come in the springtime, and that's mainly because iMac is very popular in the education market. So a lot of schools and colleges are looking at what they're going to buy around that time, ready for the new academic year starting around September. So they need to do their procurement in time, all of that kind of thing. So that's, I think, some of the stuff that needs to be kind of considered. The iPhones and the generational chip increases, so going from A14 to A15, always around September time, because then it's ready for Christmas for anyone that's looking to buy the latest phone for their family members as a Christmas gift. So that makes a lot of sense too. But in the past, as I say, Apple has always been waiting on their chip manufacturers, their chip partners, to get these chips ready so that they can then implement them into their Macs so that they can get them out the door. And when those are delayed, that puts everything back. Apple has not had delays in their own chips. You can see from the past decade that the iPhone chips have always been on time. There have been manufacturing issues through COVID. That's the only reason that we got a month later last year, but that has been resolved and Apple is back to their normal schedule of September for the iPhones. Apple also had manufacturing issues with the Apple Watch this year. That's why that had to be pushed back in terms of release date, but it was still announced on time. The other thing that I'm seeing in the comments is a lot of people saying that they don't think there will be a Mac Mini Pro, because if there was going to be one, then they would have already released it. But Apple's worried about it cannibalizing the sales of its MacBook Pros, of its iMacs, and that's something that Apple does not care about. Apple does not care about cannibalizing its own sales. As long as you're buying a Mac, Apple doesn't care which one it is. Would they like you to get a better one? Yes. Are they going to stop people buying something that would be within their budget because they want to make a bigger sale? No, because their profit margins are pretty consistent across all the lines. It doesn't matter to them which one you buy in particular. Their margins are somewhere around 40%, 38 to 40%. We'll get an update on that later next week when we get the earnings call, because that's one of the big things that comes in is their hardware margins. But Apple does not care about cannibalizing their own sales. If they did, they wouldn't be releasing $329 iPads that will run everything pretty much as well as the iPad Pro that costs £1,100. Does that have a bigger screen? Yes. Does it have some luxuries to it that you don't get with the cheap one? Yes, but it's still an iPad, and it still runs exactly the same software, basically in exactly the same way. So the Mac Mini Pro, it is coming. Whether it comes in the spring, possibly, if the delays are that bad with the manufacturing, but I think it's going to be coming, in fact, before the end of this year, because Apple was, by all accounts, behind the scenes scrambling to get it ready for the event that we've just had. That's why I think it's more likely to come out with a press release and probably a video release like the AirPods Max did. That just makes a lot of sense because they've already prepped all of the video for the event. As far as I understand it, the way that everything would make sense is they've already done all of those cool promo videos. We've already seen the design work for it. We've already heard from multiple sources that the designs that John Prosser has leaked are pretty much accurate. And there are more leaks as well arriving around similar looking products that are basically borrowing from that design language for that Mac Mini as well. Now, the only reason that Apple wouldn't be putting these out on a standard schedule is that they are wanting to redesign everything so that they have their new design language in place. That's the big reason. They want Apple Silicon to look different from what they've had in the past. However, when they first released Apple Silicon, it was basically right in the middle of a pandemic when there were massive issues with all of the manufacturing and not being able to move between factories and being able to send people out to China to make sure that everything is working properly. That's why I think they released the original Apple Silicon stuff in the existing chassis, in the existing MacBook Pro 13-inch, the existing MacBook Air 13-inch, and the existing Mac Mini. I genuinely think that the iMac design that we got had actually been designed way back, probably around 2015, because apparently it's a Johnny Ive design, and I think it's probably fair to assume it was designed to come out alongside the 12-inch MacBook that we saw, with its no-fan butterfly keyboard, the very thin chassis. I think that that was designed to come out at the same time as the new iMac that we got in 2021, but because of Intel's failures in their roadmap and the fact that their chips were too hot and too power hungry, it wasn't practical. I don't think you could have made the current iMac that we have with Intel chips. I just don't think it would have worked. And we saw Apple fail in terms of thermal design with that 12-inch MacBook, and the big problem with it was that Intel didn't follow the course that they laid out for their chips in terms of power efficiency and everything else. That's why that model got discontinued, because Intel didn't have a chip that could actually make it work. And that's why I think Apple had to delay the new iMac design, because let's be honest, the other iMac that we've been selling still to this day, the 27-inch version, that design appeared in 2013. That's a long time for Apple to be selling the same design of a product. So hopefully this all makes sense. I've probably brought up more questions than I've answered in this. So please, if there's anything that doesn't make sense, let me know down in the comments, and let's get into your questions from the past 24 hours. Sharon B asks, ICaveAnswers, a reviewer today said M1 Pro and M1 Max chips were definitely based on M1 chips. To me, those Pro Max chips seem to have a lot of new technology or features than the M1. Does this mean M2 based on A15 will be the base for next year's M2 Pro and Max chips? Yes, that's absolutely what I think is going to happen. There aren't a great deal of new features in these M1 Pro and M1 Max chips. It's just the stuff that was already there has gone massively faster. The one thing that they've added is the ProRes encoder decoder modules. Don't think other than that there's any new features. There's just more Thunderbolt lanes. There's more throughput, and I think they've added more cache. So that's really what they've done differently. More cores, but the cores themselves, the GPU cores, the neural engine cores, and the CPU cores, all exactly the same design of core as we got in M1, as we got in A14. Team Kinetix asks, ICaveAnswers, how much better do you expect the Apple polishing cloth to be over other brands? I'm expecting around about 30% better performance. One thing I really did enjoy about the polishing cloth, though, and its release, is that they included a compatibility list. So it's actually not compatible with anything before an iPhone 6. So please, for goodness sake, don't try and clean anything older than that with it. Greg West asks, ICaveAnswers, do you know the location of those Apple technical manuals that you discussed in Wednesday's show? Yep, absolutely. If you go to the iBooks store, you will find that there is a section of stuff that's created by Apple, and it's all in there. Mikey Copeland asks, ICaveAnswers, with the supposed M2 MacBook Pro when it comes, taking the 14-inch enclosure, do you think that the Air might be dropped down to a 12-inch screen to differentiate the two lines? I think a 13-inch Air might cannibalize 14-inch M2 Pro if the only difference is an inch of screen space, given that the rumours say that the Air is getting MagSafe and mini LED screens. I get that the M1 shared screen sizes, but presumably that was because the new enclosures were not ready. Apple really doesn't care about cannibalizing their own sales. It's not something that they worry about at all. And just like with the M1s, a lot of people still went for the MacBook Pro because they wanted that extra battery life. They wanted the brighter screen. They wanted the touch bar. Some people still wanted the touch bar. And some people just want to say they have a MacBook Pro as opposed to a MacBook Air. There's a level of brand recognition and a level of kind of status that comes with a MacBook Pro that doesn't necessarily come with a MacBook Air, and that's actually enough to sell some more of those. Tim Parker asks, ICaveAnswers, I'm waiting for the Mac Mini Pro. What do you expect the prices for a Mac Mini M1 Max? So this is a tricky one. I think it's going to probably start at $10.99, I hope, for the base one, maybe $12.99, I'm not 100% sure. But then the price bumps within that will be exactly the same as they are for the MacBook. So to go from an M1 Pro to an M1 Max is $500. So I would say if we're going to assume a $12.99 starting point, then we're looking at $17.99 for a Max version. That would be my best guess. That's the one with the 24-core GPU. If you want to go up to the 32-core GPU on the M1 Max, then you're looking at another $200 on top of that. So $2,000. I think that makes a lot of sense. Team Kinetix asks, ICaveAnswers, what do you think of the suggestion that the M1 Pro and Max versions of the Mac Mini were deliberately delayed to avoid negatively impacting the sales of future iMac Pro and MacBooks Pro? Is there a possibility that we won't see the Mac Mini until Q4 of 2022 when we see the Mac Pro? Absolutely not. Apple was rushing to get this ready for this event. I don't believe for a second that Apple cares about cannibalizing their own product. It's not a thing. What they would have done potentially is allocated more engineering time to get the MacBook Pros out, because the MacBook Pros are the one that is more in demand at the moment. There is more potential sales for that. They didn't delay the Mac Mini in order to let that have its time. That's not what they did. We know that they were rushing behind the scenes to get these out, so I still think we'll get it before the end of the year, and I think that will probably vindicate this. Worst case scenario, I think it'll come out alongside the larger iMac. Still don't think that's going to be called an iMac Pro in spring next year. Thomas Rabinstein asks, I'm impatiently waiting for the new iMac with 27-inch plus display and an M1 Max processor with maximum features. How do you estimate the price of the device? Are they in the same league as the MacBook Pro 16-inch or even higher? Greetings from Germany. So there does tend to be a slight premium on going for a portable rather than a desktop. Apple in general has made their iMacs a little bit cheaper than the higher end MacBook Pros. Once you're getting up to that point, you're probably talking about maybe $200 or $300 difference. So it's not a substantial difference. I hate to say that $300 is not substantial, but when you're talking about $5,500, probably not that much of a factor in whether you're going to go for that, whether you're going to upgrade it to the Max or go, oh, I'm just going to keep it down on the RAM. Once you're spending $5,500, you're probably not going to be that worried about the $300 difference. Make sense? Thomas Rundle asks, ICaveAnswers, when do you expect the next 11-inch iPad Pro to release? What are the rumoured new features? And do you think it's worth waiting for this rather than getting the current generation 11-inch iPad Pro? Thanks. I don't think you should hold your breath for that one. I think it's going to be middle of next year. So yeah, I would say probably going to be spring to summer next year, whenever we can get M2 out. I don't know if they're going to put M2 into some designs that already exist. Maybe the Mac Mini, maybe the 14-inch MacBook Pro. That should be dead easy to do. So I don't know. The delay on M2 might be engineering stuff around the MacBook Air. Team Kinetix asks, ICaveAnswers, great to see the level of subs going up. How long do you estimate before hitting 10k subs, and how will you be celebrating? Yes, we're on about 9,300 at the time of recording this. I think we're about 8 subs off at the minute. So at the minute we're going up by some days 100 subs, some days 20, 30. So I think maybe a couple of weeks. And what would you guys like when we hit 10k? Should we do a new t-shirt drop? Should we do a live stream? We could probably do both of those things. But let me know in the comments, guys, what you think we should do to celebrate it. I'd be happy to do whatever, and I just appreciate every single one of you that subs. And if you've got this far in the video and you haven't subbed yet, really appreciate it. You can get us there a little bit quicker. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.